This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, and you are listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast.
Welcome to the Walk Humbly Podcast. I'm Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese and your co-host. If you haven't already, please make sure you rate this podcast and write a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Overcast. And we are now on Spotify. I know that's a big deal for a lot of you that use Spotify. Just know that you can now listen to this podcast there. You can sign up for our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org, and you can follow Bishop Burbidge on Twitter. More than 16,000 of you already do, at Bishop Burbidge. You can also follow the Diocese on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you'd like to send questions for consideration on this podcast, email us info@arlingtondiocese.org. Again, that's info@arlingtondiocese.org. I welcome your host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, how are you?
I'm doing well, Billy. Thank you, and thanks for all those who are listening.
So we've got an important topic to discuss. Before we get to that, another important topic, but a little more positive. We have 4 new priests. I have to imagine you're very excited to welcome these 4 new men to the fraternity of the priesthood.
It really was such a joy and privilege to ordain 4 very holy, faithful, joyful men to be our newest priests. It was one of the most joyful ordinations I ever celebrated. All 4 radiate that joy. They come from loving families. The cathedral was filled beyond what we could have imagined. And we're really blessed as a diocese that the Lord has blessed us with these 4 new priests. So they received lots of applause at the ordination, and now I told them it's time to get to work.
Yeah.
So they'll actually be reporting to their first assignments on June the 27th. And so I ask all the faithful listening to them to please keep our new priests, and all of our priests, of course, in their prayers. But we are truly blessed.
And anyone that wants to see that full ordination rite, they can go to our YouTube channel and check that out. We've got the full video there. Also posted photos on the Herald's website, CatholicHerald.com. Bishop, in your homily, you briefly mentioned the issues that the Church is facing over the last year, and you put them in their ordination in kind of this larger context of our challenges, and they joined the priesthood in a challenging time in Church history, period. How did you talk to them about some of these issues in this crisis as their ordination got a little closer?
And that was a real debate in my own mind as I was preparing the homily, because it is such a joyful celebration. And yet at the same time, we all have to acknowledge that this has been, as you mentioned, one of the most difficult and challenging year that we've experienced in the Church. So I felt like there was a need, without taking the joy out of the ceremony, of at least putting that in context. And the way I did that, Billy, was to use the theme that I heard throughout my listening sessions as I traveled the diocese. And the theme was that, yes, these are very difficult times, very challenging times, just as the Church has experienced in the past throughout her history. But the one thing I heard over and over again from our lay faithful was, but, where do we find our hope? We find our hope and our confidence in knowing that ultimately this is the Lord's church. It's His church. And He promised to remain with us. He promised that nothing would destroy His church. And He's faithful to that promise. And I saw the ordination really as God's sign to us that, yes, my promises are true. Look at this. Here are 4 new priests who will be my instruments, helping to bring about the healing and the transformation that we know is so necessary at this time in our lives. And then I reminded the priests, which is a reminder to myself and all of us who are entrusted with this sacred duty, that the only way that we can be faithful and be those instruments is by staying close to the vine, to the Lord, the one in whom we find our strength and our grace. And I'm confident that these men will certainly do that.
And when I saw them up there and you had introduced them for the first time as priests, we did have that feeling of hope that this is a sign from God. But you've also talked about on this podcast and before that it's not just this class, that we've had the largest applicant pool ever in this for this seminary to this diocese. That's another sign that it's not just men that were in seminary when this crisis occurred. There are men joining the seminary amidst the crisis saying, I want to help, I want to do my part.
In my time, this as an ordinary, this has been the largest class that I've accepted.
Wow.
And, worldly logic will say, well, as the church is going through such a difficult period of time, you might as well expect that you're not going to get many men to come forward to say, hey, I want to be a priest.
Right, that would be the prediction.
But right now, we are incredibly blessed with the number of men coming forward. But again, I think it's part of the Lord just being faithful to his promise that, yes, we need healing. And these are the men I'm choosing to be part of that gift to my church. And we certainly keep the bar, as I always assure our people, very high for those we accept to our seminary, because this is a rigorous program. And you can't have saints because we're not saints yet.
Right.
But you need men who are very strong in body and soul and spirit, who have the qualities to go through a rigorous program. We certainly can trust their motives, because no one's coming forward to be a priest now expecting to get the applause of their peers and world. They're coming forward because they know this is God's call, and they're coming forward with, I think, a great deal of courage.
Well, that's certainly what the church needs right now.
Right.
So our main topic, Bishop, is this week you and your brother bishops gathered to continue the work of addressing issues of bishops' accountability and misconduct in the church. And before we get into a lot of the substance of what was discussed at this meeting, this General Assembly meeting, what was the mood and the spirit of the bishops like in Baltimore?
I would say the spirit was one of urgency.
Oh, good.
Like we prepared for this meeting. We had conference calls, we had webinars in advance, preparing us for what the documents, the action items would be. Certainly, we had our retreat in January, which I think set the tone for this meeting in June, that we were entering already having been together in prayer and trusting our work to the Lord. But there was a sense of we have some work to do here. And it was a follow-up to our November meeting where we wanted to move forward with some action items. We understood that the Holy See, for appropriate reasons, said, well, to be in a line with what the Holy Father wants for the Universal Church, some adjustments were needed. That was a little bit of a setback. But we went into this meeting ready to go and knowing already that we have communicated well with the Holy See because we want to be one. So we went into the meeting, I think, well prepared, but we went in there okay, now we have a job to do. And so we got right to work. And in summary, I know we'll go into some details, but in summary, I am extremely pleased that the goals and the objectives with which we entered the meeting were accomplished.
And you went in for the first time being the chair of the communications committee, hosting some of the press conferences. How did that go? That was a different position than you normally in.
Right. Yes. Exactly. What a year.
Yeah.
But no, as chair of the communications committee, after each session, there is a press conference, and I'm at each session as the chair, and then each day, depending on who presented the action items, those bishops would join me. So we would walk into a room with 50, 60 members of media nationally and locally. And but I would have to say those conferences went very well. There were good questions, but I really had the sense that the media was trying to make sure that they understood what was being said and what was being accomplished. So I really appreciated the questions we received, and I think we helped them to understand better.
That's wonderful. Now, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of involving the lay faithful. The Holy Father wrote a motu proprio, which is a document of the Pope's own initiative, and it's to be used globally. It's for the universal church. Here are the norms, as they're called, that kind of set the tone for everybody, no matter whether you're in, Tahiti or Japan or here, a set of norms for investigating bishops, and that it was written in there that the laity would assist. But there's a question about whether or not it was mandatory and all these different things. The bishops seem to have really gone another step further and made this commitment that the lay faithful will be involved, because they're already involved in so many other parts of diocesan management and life. That you talked about that a number of times, and in fact, going back to what you said about the national media, you were quoted a number of times on that. But kind of summarize for people the role of the lay faithful and why that was important.
Right.
Important topic for you all.
So, as you mentioned, the motu proprio was dealing with bishops' accountability and how the report concerns, and dealing with the universal church.
Right.
Came from the Pope himself. It was his initiative. the bishops of any conference in the world, including the United States, cannot add or delete from the motu proprio.
Right.
So that is the Holy Fathers. So there was the sentence in there saying that in the investigation, when reports come in, the use of lay expertise is very much encouraged. And so that did cause a concern from some of the media. Say, well, why not encourage? Why isn't it mandatory? Remember, this is to the whole world. And so to mandate something that a local conference of bishops or a certain country cannot do because they do not have that kind of expertise readily available to them would be the reason why the Pope did not say it's mandated.
Right.
But strongly encouraged. And so as a conference, we really just reaffirmed what we're already doing. Which is the use of lay expertise. So, for example, in 2002, when the charter for the implementation protection of children and youth and children, diocesan review boards were mandated.
Right.
The diocesan review boards necessarily consist of people with expertise in psychology and criminal law, all those areas that you need to assist you. So bishops are very much accustomed to using such lay expertise. But to make it clear, in the United States, in a separate document called our Episcopal Commitment, I think it's number 4,
all right.
we said, and we understand and we will use the expertise of laity, which we added this phrase, which is indispensable. So I don't know how stronger we can be. We understand that we cannot carry out this work without such expertise, which is the practice that we're using currently.
And it makes sense that for a diocese in another country where that expertise might not be available to a bishop, what is he supposed to do? But in the U.S., it's a very different context, and it's already proven itself to be effective with the charter and dealing with priests and accusations and allegations that come against them. Why not implement that there? And it was good to see that implemented, because if it hadn't been at the end of this meeting, there would have been a lot of stories about that, but it was good to see it was written in.
That's the whole point. And so, any of these headlines, this is about bishops policing bishops, that is totally inaccurate.
So let's go to that point, because that's a very, very good point that was said a lot. So most of the process or the discussion at this meeting was about the ecclesial process. What does a bishop do to investigate, review, and make decisions about what's sent to Rome for accusations against bishops? We already have that process for priests. They can't dictate what would happen criminally, but the obligation to report is there. And it was stated many times, but still you'll see headlines about bishops policing bishops, which is not what the bishops were communicating at this conference.
Yeah, so this is an important subject, and I'm glad our listeners will persevere in allow me to explain this, because it's very important. So what has never been taken away, if there is a concern about a priest or a bishop or a deacon or anyone within the church violating a trust, every individual has the right to go to civil authorities.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which is what we encourage, okay? What we promised in 2002 with the charter is once we get any kind of report of any such misconduct, we automatically, before anything else, we automatically report it to civil authorities. So that has not changed.
Right.
Okay. And then with the motu proprio, our Holy Father is saying that this conduct and the accountability of the sacred trust applies to bishops also.
Right.
Of course, it always has. But the motu proprio makes that very well known universally. Okay.
Right. There was kind of specifics that are laid out there, and then you all were able to establish things like this hotline.
Right. So let me do the 3 things if we could. So the 3 things, because the charter in 2002 applied to priests and deacons with the idea that bishops are responsible directly to the Holy Father.
Right.
That never said that people should not go, if they had concerns, to civil authority, to the apostolic nuncio, to the metropolitan archbishop, or whatever. But now we formalize that. So in addition to the motu proprio from the Holy Father, we actually did 3 things. And maybe this is the key for our listeners to understand.
Very good.
And we called, I would say, Billy, they're called protocols, number one, Episcopal commitment, number two, and directives. Okay? So let's go to the first one, protocol. Right. That's the guidance on bishops who were removed or who resigned for reasons related to sexual abuse or abuse of power, the guidance on the participation of what can be done with those bishops. So it comes back to the local authority, the ordinary of the diocese, who is able to say, because of the circumstances with which you have resigned or were forced to resign, you have no public ministry in this diocese or whatever. So you can implement protocols. They're dealing mostly with bishops who were removed or resigned for such reasons.
Right.
Okay. The Episcopal commitment is something we did similar in 2002, but we expanded in our recent meeting, saying, and we bishops hold ourselves accountable to all of these norms and expectations that the church and the faithful have of us, and we outline them very clearly. Basically, they're a summary of what we promised God when we were ordained, but become a little bit more specific. And all the bishops saying, yes, these are our commitments, which include, as I said earlier, the use of lay expertise. The third is probably something that was very substantial, and that is including that a national third-party reporting system is what we call it. And so it is a national hotline where if anyone has a concern about the bishop's misconduct, of violation of boundaries or sexual misconduct, that they can go to civil authorities, they can report it to the nuncio or to the metropolitan. But we also establish, here's another means. Here's a national hotline that you can call, which would be received. We're still, once now that it's approved, we have to work out the details of its implementation. But basically, it would be with a firm who operates, this hotline for us, who receives, the complaint, and then automatically forwards them to the Metropolitan Archbishop.
Okay. So before you go to what a metropolitan is, it sounds like this really simplifies things for people, because a lot of people might not even know what a nuncio is. So just by providing a hotline and making that available on diocesan websites and so on once it's established, it makes it very easy that if someone has been abused or mistreated in some way sexually, that they have a simple way to report it and know that they've done what they can to make this known to the right church authorities.
That's right.
Okay.
And so it's similar. I'm sure many people can identify it with their own, in the corporate world. Where there's ethics points or different, if you have concerns or something like that, here's the line that you call. So it's using that kind of model, okay? And then a metropolitan, just to repeat to our listeners, in every geographical region, there's a diocese are combined for how can we work together pastorally.
So it's like a grouping of dioceses in a region. Okay.
And then one's called the metropolitan. So our region, number 4, is Richmond and Arlington, Baltimore, Wheeling, Charleston, West Virginia, and Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
The Archbishop of Baltimore is our metropolitan.
Okay.
He has no authority over any of those dioceses.
For normal day-to-day
direct
type of things.
Governance or anything like that. He brings us together, to discuss, our pastoral issues. But in this model, any of those reports would go from the national hotline to the metropolitan, to the apostolic nuncio.
So 2 different people have received it. Then,
Well, then actually 3, because the person on the national hotline.
That's true. Yeah.
And then it goes to Rome, who will decide how this will, who will be entrusted with carrying out these reports that we've heard.
And that was one of the points of complexity that the bishops had to sort out, is the Holy Father still has to be in charge. He is still the one providing oversight over bishops, but if an allegation comes in front of a bishop, the Holy Father needs the assistance of a local bishop or archbishop who's the metropolitan, to carry out that investigation on his behalf. So it's really him in the end making these decisions, but it's handled, it's investigated locally within the church in addition to what the authorities might do.
Yeah. And again, if it's any criminal behavior or anything like that, the civil authorities are also,
and they're going to have to work together.
Exactly. And then the Holy Father can delegate maybe if it's the metropolitan, if it's a complaint against someone in one of his dioceses,
right,
you're in charge of the investigation. At which point, and we have recent examples of this both in New York and in Baltimore, he puts together lay involvement, about maybe up to 5 lay people, saying, I've been entrusted to carry out this investigation. I need your help to do it.
Yeah.
And then the laity will, conduct the interviews and do the investigations. Laity with expertise. Mm-hmm. They submit all their reports to the metropolitan. He writes what we call a votum, or a cover letter summarizing what has been found,
right,
and sends it to the Holy See for a decision. Now, what he has to include with his votum or his report is everything that was given to him by those who carried out the investigation.
Right.
And then you're right. Then the Holy See will make a decision. Mm-hmm. In the case of former Cardinal McCarrick, it was laicization.
Right.
So it is up to the Holy See to make that decision.
And in the case, the other one, Bishop Bransfield, they've already found a determination of credibility in a lot of these allegations that have come forward. So we've seen this model work, because that was carried out by Archbishop Lori out of Baltimore. So it's interesting to see that this has already worked before the bishops even met to kind of go over the details of how does this operate.
And that report is already in Rome. Now, one thing that I think has been made a little bit more firm is now the Metropolitan doesn't decide what parts of the reports that the Holy See gets. They get all of the reports.
Right, yeah. So a lot of those kinds of things have been clarified.
Right.
But it was interesting to see going in that there are a couple of cases to point to. This isn't a totally new concept.
That's right.
It has been worked out.
Yes. And so, so we had to vote upon those 3 things, the protocols, the commitments, and the directives. And it was almost unanimous across the board that there was, great consensus among the bishops that we should move forward with that, and we will wait, the Holy See's, final response to us. And I think, Billy, we are we're going to, in our Catholic Herald, make this a little bit more well known and spelled out a little bit. So I know sometimes it's hard listening, but we'll have some things in our diocesan newspaper that hopefully will make things more clear. And as you always suggest at the end of our podcast, may I also mention that after hearing this podcast, if there are questions that you would like me to address, send them in, and then our next podcast we could say, wow, this is a question that we heard frequently, so maybe I didn't do a good job explaining it, and we would like to answer your question.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, again, so info@arlingtondiocese.org, so if you have questions about how it'll work. But to kind of go back over, so there's the implementation of a bishop's code of conduct that reaffirms the commitments that a bishop has are the same as those of priests in the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. That's already well established. Obviously, the reporting to civil authorities immediately. If a criminal allegation comes forward, just as we do with priests, it's going to the authorities.
Absolutely.
The commissioning of this national hotline for reporting violations to be in accord with the Pope Francis's motu proprio, and then the involvement of qualified lay professionals. It seems like those are 4 big things that needed to be accomplished in this meeting. There certainly were. Right. And a point that you had made, I think, at one of the press conferences was, this isn't the last time that this will be addressed. This is like one and done. No, this is the beginning of an evolving process to build the best system possible to make sure the faithful are confident that if a bishop has done something really egregious, it will be addressed, whether by criminal authorities or by church authorities.
Right. Even the motu proprio, the Holy Father wants that reviewed in 3 years. And that's what we have to do. We can do our very best in thinking, all right, we think we have this. We have the right procedures. We have the right protocols. We're doing background checks. We're doing this. And then you find out that there's a gap here. Okay, where did this go wrong? Let's fix this. Let's address it. And so, like you said, that's a very good word. It's ongoing. Mm-hmm. But the sense of urgency, the sense of wanting the transparency, wanting the accountability, wanting the lay expertise to assist us is all very, very, very clear and evident in the body of bishops.
So we've gone through a lot of the procedural. Let me step back and ask a pastoral question.
Yes.
That's the heart of your ministry as it is, right? So a key question for the church that came up at Thursday's press conference was, how does the church evangelize amidst the crisis and win back the faithful who are distrusting church leaders right now? So what is, as a pastor, putting your pastor's hat, what What would you say to someone who was asking that question?
Yeah, it's funny because it also came up as a question in the press conference.
Yeah.
I think the way it was worded, one of the reporters said, there was 4 of us on the panel, I think at that time, all bishops, and the reporter said, like, in dealing with all these things that you were dealing with this week, like, does it ever like bother you that wouldn't you rather be doing like evangelization and teaching?
Right,
and we all smiled, it's like, of course we would, but we understand that right now, nothing could be more important for us.
Yeah.
Than this crisis, this challenge that we have, and to begin to restore the trust of the faithful in her bishops and in the church. And so, because it's, of course, much more fulfilling pastorally to be doing the evangelizing and teaching, that right now this demands basically full attention here.
Yeah, and you were very clear that was
Right.
the focus of the meeting, was
Right.
the governance. So
Right.
a bishop's responsible for teaching.
But even in the midst of
sanctifying
this, Billy, that the other things cannot stop, right? I always say to our faithful, hopefully they know by now that the threefold responsibilities of a bishop is teaching, sanctifying sacraments, and governing, this is what this is dealing with, governance. But even throughout this crisis this past year, I made sure that my teaching and sanctifying ministries had to continue. And that's why I continue to go out to the schools, go out to the parishes. That has to continue. But because of circumstances, this at our bishop's meeting and basically throughout this past year has consumed a great deal of our time.
And it's good to see this kind of progress makes. I think it will open up the church to greater evangelization going forward. Any final thoughts? And then if you would send us off with your blessing.
No, thank you. But I received many messages, emails from our faithful assuring me that they were praying for me and for my brother bishops throughout this past week, asking the Holy Spirit to enlighten us and guide us and lead us. And I would like to say, first of all, thank you. You don't know how much that means when you hear that people are praying for you. That's something, when we say to others, we should never underestimate, as I've said often, the impact of that. And I felt that going into the meeting. And I would like to assure the faithful that I really do think their prayers were answered, because I really did feel the power of the Holy Spirit, guiding us, and the serenity that comes from that. When the Spirit's at work, there's no fear, or there's a sense of serenity in that, the Spirit of God is here. And I really did feel that, even that we were dealing with very serious subjects throughout our meeting. So I guess my message would be just a word of thanks for the prayers. But please continue those prayers. And again, we are going to try in our, not only in this podcast, but in our diocesan newspaper, our social media, to continue to try to make this as clear to our faithful as possible, because we want this transparency. And so use that, maybe we're not doing questions, I don't think, at this podcast,
right.
But we could devote some time to any of the questions that surface from this podcast that may be helpful to our listeners.
Absolutely. And again, so if you have a question that you would like answered, just email us. It's info@arlingtondiocese.org. And we do look at all of them. Usually we take a couple in the next episode. If we get a lot of questions about this, we'll answer more questions than usual, whatever it takes to make sure the faithful are confident in the answers they get.
So thank you, Billy, and I thank our listeners for your time to allow us to have this conversation with you, and certainly pray for all of you, maybe throughout these summer months, that God will give you some time to be refreshed and renewed individually, as families, to have that time of refreshment, renewal that the Lord so much wants for us, and that God will continue to bless you in all of your endeavors, and together to help us to be renewed in our commitment to walk humbly with our God. Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast. Make sure you check out more episodes on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can follow me on Twitter @Bishop Burbidge, where I offer spiritual reflections each morning on the gospel and share photos and updates of what is going on in the Diocese of Arlington. Stay up to date with news, event information, inspirational content, and more by subscribing to our e-newsletter at Arlington Diocese. www.walkhumbly.org.